Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out this evening and joining us at SVA MA Design Research. My name is Molly Heinz, and I am the new co-chair of the program, along with our founding chair and co-chair, Alice Twimlow, who's now based in Amsterdam and not here in body this evening, but joining us in spirit. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of information about the program in case you're unfamiliar with it. First off, this is the lineup of our fall lecture series. So we're on number 3 of the fall, and so excited to have Marco Ferrari with us this evening. And I'll say a little bit more about Marco in a second, but I wanted to also point your attention to our open house, which is happening on November 10th. Same time, same day, Tuesday, November 10th. And we will be talking about the program. We'll be talking about what you could expect if you enroll as an MA here. We'll have a little presentations by our faculty, some alumni, and some current students as well, along with some convivial cocktails and conversation. So if you might be interested in the program or our summer intensive program, or know somebody who might be, please send them our way on November 10th. We have a really broad definition of design here, and we like to think of design not just as a noun, but design as a verb. So design is an active process, and how we can talk about it and analyze that. And just a little at a glance view of our program. It's currently the MA is 1 year, 2 semesters, adds up to about 9 months. We have currently some significant scholarships that make it quite affordable, and we are not just sitting here in the classrooms. We're actually out and about quite a bit, visiting sites. We have guest lecturers coming in to speak to the class directly, in addition to our spring and fall lecture series. We have lots of exciting assignments, as well as one big fat thesis, which the MA students are just embarking upon right now. And lots and lots of reading, of course. A little snapshot of our faculty. Some great active practitioners in both journalism and design. The faculty is really what attracts a lot of students to the program, and they can't be beat. And the faculty bring with them a lot of great connections. This is just from last week, a slightly blurry photo that I took surreptitiously, that I wasn't supposed to, of Roberta Smith holding forth. Roberta Smith, who was one of the senior art critics at the New York Times, was brought in by our faculty member Robin Pogreben, who is also on staff at the New York Times as an arts and culture reporter. And Roberta gave a great presentation on her opinion on how to perform criticism, and we all got a lot out of it. And I got yelled at for taking the photo. This is a little overview of the kinds of assignments and skills that we hope to develop, from writing news stories to op-eds to creating portfolios and podcasts. And really, I think overall, we really want students to be able to leave here with an understanding of how to perform in-depth research, but also how to develop a point of view and communicate it. Applying is really straightforward and easy. The usual transcripts, letters of recommendations, a statement of intent, writing sample, and a resume. And you can find out more on our website. We will have the lecture by Marco, and then a short Q&A, which I'll kick off and then open it to the floor. And then we invite you to join us in our studio space, where our grad students work, for a little cocktail reception following. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Marco Ferrari. Marco is an architect and designer based in Milan, and a partner at Studio Folder, an agency for visual research co-founded with Elisa Pasqual in 2012. And previously, he was a founding partner of the Venice-based architectural office Salottobuono. He has also been an editor at Abitare magazine, creative director of Domus magazine, and that is just a few of his accomplishments. In addition to working with Folder, Marco teaches theories and methods of representation at ISIA in Urbino, and information design at the MA Communication Design program at IUAV, if I said that correctly, University in Venice. So I met Marco about a year and a half ago at the 2014 Venice Architecture Biennale, when during the opening weekend he participated in a panel discussion called Towards a New Avant-Garde, which was organized by Superscript, whom I work with. And we were nodding to certain architects who were working in Europe in the late 60s and early 70s, and we asked the question, today, what does it mean for architects to be radical? And to answer this question, we invited a handful of young thinkers and practitioners, and being familiar with his work, we knew that Marco and his office Folder absolutely had to be among them. And Rem Koolhaas and the organizers of the biennial felt the same way. Folder was invited to actually create an exhibition as well for the Biennale called Italian Limes, which you'll hear more about from Marco. And it was awarded a special mention, which is a huge honor as part of the Biennale program. The same project also received a silver medal at the 2015 European Design Awards, and it is now part of the permanent design collection of the V&A Museum in London. So we are very lucky to catch Marco here during a short stay in New York, where for the last few weeks he has been installing an off-site exhibition for the Guggenheim, one element of a bigger project with curator Troy Conrad Tieren. I think I pronounced that correctly. And it is called Ozone Futures Market. It just opened on Friday along with its website counterpart, which I think Marco will tell us a little bit more about, and Troy is here in the audience, and you can talk to him afterwards about it as well. So Marco kindly agreed to extend his stay and come speak to us on his last night in the city. So please join me in welcoming Marco Ferrari.
Thank you, Molly. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I'm really honored and happy to be part of this really outstanding lecture series you're organizing at SBA. So today I'd like to talk to you about some of the most recent projects of my practice Folder, and but specifically with a specific focus on the research approach we try to kind of use when we start a project. Before actually diving into some images of this project, I'd like to start with a few images that try to focus on one of our, let's say, obsessions, which is drawing, and in general representation, or like what we can think as the methods and techniques by which we represent reality, so by which we represent the world, the material world itself. What I intend as representation, as I tried to condense in this very brief second title of the lecture, I intend representation as a way of building and understanding a ecosystem of information. So representation is both a way of reading and making things legible, but also a way of manipulating information in the world itself. So what do we should start. What do we intend for ecosystem? Ecosystem is a concept which initially started, was formulated initially in biology, so in botanics in particular, and then became really popular in the 60s and 70s when computers, machines started to basically take command of every aspect of our life. And these are images from the beginning of one of the 3 episodes of Adam Carty's All What's Lovely by Machines Lovely Grace, in which like a very important part of this trilogy is about the very idea of the ecosystem and how it is being used as a metaphor of basically any process of contemporary society from the 70s onwards. At the very, let's say, the very basic definition of ecosystem stands this idea of feedback loops. So the idea of that everything is connected somehow within like a single environment, and the cause and effect of every action is interconnected. So somehow I think drawing has the same kind of power, in the sense that when we draw something, we create an ecosystem of meanings. So by drawing something, by creating a kind of closed and fixed representation of reality, we create an ecosystem of different meanings and concepts and layers that we can understand in relation one to each other. So somehow when we look at what we can consider this very common and super famous image, one of the first known drawings, we kind of see that here already there's the idea of the ecosystem. So something which, all these elements in this image, which represent an action of hunting, they're interconnecting to each other. What is really interesting for this, in this first manifestation of a drawing technique, of a drawing example, is that we don't know if this kind of representation, what is the aim of this kind of representation? If it is something which is documenting, like an act which happened in the past, or if it's something which is actually trying to, it's what we can define as a propitiatory act. So like if this belongs to some religious idea, so it is done in order to make something real in the future, okay, to make it, to believe it will become real. While if we move to the other kind of drawing, which is a few years later, but still the same kind of path of evolution, in this case, the subject are fish, is a fish, but what is interesting and what we see here is the anatomy of the fish. So in this case, I think there's been a transformation. So there's no doubt that in this kind of image, drawing has become a tool for investigation. So a tool by which human can record, store, and also transmit knowledge. Because somehow in this element, of course, the drawing depicts what we can't see with the eyes, and also try to fix a knowledge which has been like acquired in a specific moment in history, and to make it understandable for other people. Of course, this evolution of drawing kept like growing, and this became particularly clear in the early Renaissance, when perspective drawing, so the techniques by which we can represent, like we can replicate realistic representation of reality, became canonized with the manuals and the treatises, and drawing became a translation, a visual translation of some geometrical and mathematical coordinates and operations. So basically, a completely abstract way of translating, a way of translating abstract thoughts and concepts into a visual way. Beyond this point, after theory, so after having basically laid down this kind of mathematical operation, then there came the machine. So this is a very famous engraving by Dürer, in which it depicts a sort of a prototype of let's say, a computer, of a machine that basically allows painters to draw a correct perspective. So basically, it's an aid to make a correct representation of reality. Basically, it's the first machine to be able to produce a render of something. And of course, with the creation of these first machines, it became really clear how drawing was not only a way of representing reality in general terms, but representing reality with precision and accuracy. So the way in which technology can allow us to be precise is very important. These are images from another essay from the 17th century, in which again this machine became more and more sophisticated and allowed painter to being able to basically digitalize reality, to make an image in which was very easy to fragment reality and reproduce it on another surface. The last chapter of this very fast history of drawing is the publication of the Encyclopédie in France by Diderot and d'Alembert. which again, the aim was to, maybe for the first time in very strong terms, the aim was to create an ecosystem of knowledge. So basically to create a publication in which all the human knowledge, so everything that's been known and created until that moment, was indexed and connected together in one single object, so one single set of books. And again, it's quite interesting that this image, which is basically what we can consider the index of the encyclopedia, which is called the figurative system of human knowledge, is actually a drawing, so a diagram, like a taxonomy. And then it's very interesting also that almost a third of the pages of the encyclopedia is occupied by is taken by drawing, in which it's very interesting to compare these two images that are often paired together in the encyclopedia, in which you see sort of a realistic description of depiction of reality in the above part, in which there is a scene of like life at the time when it was published. And in the bottom part there is the same objects but drawn like in parallel projections and indexed with the aid of captions. So it's basically the same scene, but the first one is just a way of giving the context, and the second one is basically a manual. So the second one is a way of fixing knowledge and make it replicable, make it like understandable to everybody without all the things that are part of the temporary context when it's happening. And also the encyclopedia is very interesting because along with other manuals that from the, of course with the easiness of print and publication from the 18th century became very popular across Europe and the world, but drawing became a vector of technological innovation. So drawing became not only a way of representing again reality, but a way to record what was happening as the new machines that were being discovered, the new scientific discovery, etc. So this kind of concept of understanding drawing as a way of basically capture an image of the world as a whole. I found a lot of similarities within this definition, which is by Luciano Perondi, one of the most talented type designer we have in Italy. And he wrote this book called Sinsemia. Actually, he defined this word Sinsemia. And Sinsemia is a very interesting concept because what it says is basically there's no interruption between any kind of visual output. So if you think about text, or we think about drawing, or if you think about painting, so anything that composes a visual image is basically language and text. Or if you want to use another term, information. And there's actually no difference. So anything, when we look at something which is like in a page or on a wall, there's no kind of differences between the elements. The context, the concepts and meanings, they continually flow and influence each other. And I think it's a very contemporary, very important definition of information design, in which what we intend for information design not just representing data or numbers, but representing reality as a whole. So the first project I'd like to show you is actually like a series of like a column I curated with my former office, Salottobuono, for 4 years for the magazine Abitare. And it's kind of a quite literal translation of this concept we've seen until now. Instructions and manuals were a regular column, so was published monthly on the magazine, and the aim was to give to every project which was presenting within every issue of the magazine a double spread like this one, which drawing would have helped the reader to understand better the features and the context of the object. They could have been buildings, as in this case, design objects, exhibition, whatever was published in the magazine. So what we came out, we were asked by the editor-in-chief, Stefano Poeri, at that time, to actually trying to use to create a language which was aim was to talk about architecture without using architectural drawing in the very technical term that architects are used to use. So using projections and other kind of techniques, representation, in a way which were more open to the public, which was not trained to read those drawings. So, as you can see in this specific example, what we came up with was a way of trying to describe the project. In this case, was a prototype of like existence minimum, so a very small house by Samir Intala, a Finnish architect. In the first part of the drawing, it's very kind of common and simple axonometric explosion of the object, which we tried to distinguish the three main elements by which architecture was composed. So the structural elements, the furniture, and the facade, so the cladding. The particular feature of this project is that each of these three aspects was built by different type of woods. So what we did in the other part was to divide the woods, the pieces of woods according to their geometry, dimensions, and functions. But it also always using the same scale and the same kind of perspective. And in this final drawing, the one in the middle, is always the same scale, just the abstract volume of those pieces of wood. So it's just an attempt to translate the same object, so the same pieces of reality, with the same kind of technique and the same scale in three different ways. And then what you see around the drawings are other information, which are less and less related to the object itself. So our idea was to try to basically build, again, an ecosystem or like different layers of information, like a sphere, which we always started from the object itself, trying to describe it in the most objective and precise terms, and then adding other editorial layers of things which are connected somehow with the client, with the process for construction, so with the materials, or whatever. For example, in this case, there is a plan of the existence minimum in Frankfurt in 1928, which somehow is connected because it's brought in the same kind of architectural traditions. Then there are some diagrams of average space for residential spaces in Europe. And on that page, there's some representation of the trees from which the different woods were taken from. This is another example which Abitare published in the IUAV Museum by Sana. We did this double spread in which on one side we represented the complexity of the structural engineering of the building with all the different layers of the facade. And on the other side, at the same scale, we tried to make the reader understand what was the purpose of these very complex structures, which basically was to try to let the light come from the top. So creating these kind of boxes in order to shift them in order to let light inside. And then again, there are things like the gentrification of the Bowery, the other buildings, and the explanation of the setback. So why this building take inspiration from the setback, etc. So we experimented a lot with drawings, trying always to be very strict with the rules. So we always have these three colors, so green as a background, white and black and transparencies. And all within the small space of a double spread, we try to always create some meaning, so create some meaningful connection between different layers around the objects. In this case was a guitar, which the particularity was carved out from a single block of aluminium with the same process, technological process that is used for manufacturing the blades of jet engines. In this case was again a design project by Martino Camper, 100 chairs in 100 days, which we picked up 2 chairs and we showed the transformation by which it started from 2 very known chairs, he ended up designing a new chairs of its own. And in this case was maybe the weirdest of all of them was when officially invited to an exhibition in Milan. We took their most famous work, the Laughter Dinge, the way things go, and we transformed into a visual catalog of all the chemical and physical reactions that happen within the video. The second project I would like to present you is Italian Limes, which is a very different project for the first one. So it's not an editorial project, it's basically an exhibition, interactive installation, but in which drawing and again this research into what's the connection between reality and representation is what is its focus. So the project started in 2000 and at the end of 2013, when the curatorial team of the Biennale, directed by Rem Koolhaas, asked us, among other people, to present a proposal for a topic, for a possible exhibition within the Arsenale. Their idea was to dedicate the whole Arsenale, which is, many of you, I think, have been in Venice during the Biennial, this long building which hosts one of the main parts of the Biennial. And Koolhaas decided to dedicate this building to Italy and to arrange an exhibition in which several projects were organized according to a geographical index. So basically from south to north, all these 40 projects part of the exhibition, they had to talk about a specific place in Italy, but also of the country itself. And they had to pick like one topic connected to this place. What we decided to start working on was the idea of the border, and especially the terrestrial border of Italy, which is basically the one which is delimited by the Alps. This is so for our interest in representation, but also because we're also very interested in understanding how exceptional spaces and transnational devices work in contemporary work. So we wanted to understand how, let's say, the visual limits of the nation state contributed to make Italy a modern state, a modern country, and also how basically what the border is. Try to define what the border, which everybody of us think is just a thin line on a map, what actually is on a land. So what are the different manifestations that the border can have on a physical space. And especially a very interesting thing from the perspective of a European citizen is that in the past 20 years we moved from this kind of landscape. When I was a child, for me it was very strong going in and out of Italy because you always encounter this kind of structure, this kind of architecture. So what we call dogana, so like basically a little house in which you check passports. And from this, so nowadays if you cross the countries that are part of the Schengen treaty, you don't see any border. You barely perceive you are exiting or entering a country. But still, if you take a map of Europe, the borders are still there, and they are very evident, exactly as they were 50 years ago, 100 years ago. So what happened? We really wanted to understand what happened what this kind of transition meant. Especially considering that even if as Europeans, so a very privileged type of citizens, we perceive there are no more borders in a very broad area where we live, still international borders are maybe the numbers of international borders that we witness nowadays has never been so high in the history of humankind. So somehow the idea that everything can flow without borders is part of the rhetoric of globalization, of course, so it doesn't really happen at the end. But still, border became very difficult to understand. So apart when they are building walls, there are a lot of borders that we don't see. So what we did to understand this problem was to look back at history. So understanding how in a country like Italy, the border was designed for the first time. So when somebody decided that the border was exactly that line and how that happened. So we went in Florence, which is where the headquarters of the National Mapping Agency is in Italy. Like for example in US there is a USGS, in Italy it's called IGM, Istituto Geografico Militare. It's part of the army, so that's interesting information. And so we started to look into their archives, which was quite difficult to have access to. And we collected all these materials, mainly photographic, but also a lot of notebooks and drawings of all this huge effort that the military army started to do in the late 19th century up to the 50s to basically measure the whole country. And by measuring the whole country, also drawing the border. The aim, of course, was to take measures with precise measures of all these dots that allowed the army to design what is called a trigonometric network. So basically a network of triangles, which before GPS was the only way to know the exact position of every point on a piece of land. The interesting thing is that this network was not just an abstract thing, an abstract way of taking measures, but actually was embedded into the terrain. So all these thousands and thousands of points of measures were actually built as pieces of stone, metal plaques, and all this kind of very strange wooden structure within the land. So they could be like recognizable and they're fixed on the land. Because actually they were the only way of making a relation between what was stored in the maps and what is actually the land is. And then we found these beautiful hand-drawn atlases, which before computer drawing, they were the only way of, again, drawing the border. For example, there are 4 very old atlases which define the border between Italy and the neighboring countries, so Yugoslavia, before it became Slovenia and Croatia, Slovenia actually only, Austria, France, and Switzerland. And they were all basically storing this, what the border was. This is a section of the border in which you have like 1 kilometer of land on the 2 sides. And of course, this machine came. So this is the first GPS owned by Italia, the Italian army in the late 80s. And all this effort of measuring the land with trigonometric network became useless. So they spent basically 80 years doing something which then was replaced by this machine. But what was interesting is that when GPS was acquired, so a new work had to begin. So basically, the effort was then to translate all those coordinates into digital coordinates. So again, they started again, and in like a couple of decades, they measured the same points they've built before with GPS. And of course, you imagine that Italian territory is quite difficult to measure because most of the time is, and especially the part of the territory we're interested to is the Alps. So in most part of the Alps were mapped in the 20s and the 30s, so were like a very inaccessible and remote part of the land. And then these are the documents that this is actually one of more updated atlas of the border. So the visual language completely changed. So there's no more context, just basically a line with some coordinates and the position of all these physical marks on the terrain. So we're all very fascinated by all these different visual outputs that describe this concept of the border, but we still didn't really focus on something, so we didn't understand what the exhibition could be about. Until we found a small piece of news of 2 years before, that basically was about a mobile border. So what we found is that the Italian border is defined by a line which corresponds to the watershed line. I'll try to explain this kind of concept because it's very important to understand the word I'll show you later. So the watershed line is a geographical feature which basically is the line, so the range, which divides the water. So everything that falls on the south goes to a river in Italy, everything which falls down on the north goes to a river in Austria. So this geographical feature is something which is defined by geology. So, and after World War I, all the countries neighboring on the Alps decided, okay, this will be the border. So we just measure this land and we fix that as border. What happens is that this watershed line, in most part, runs on glacier. So on pieces of land in which there is permanent ice, and they are very remote, so they're very up in the mountains, so that nobody lives there, nobody goes there. Since 2008, because of climate change, these glaciers started to melt, like considerably, and to disappear. So what happened is that the IGM, so the National Mapping Agency, realized that the border that was drawn in the map no more coincided with what was in reality. So this line, this watershed line, completely changed because a lot of those ice fields completely disappeared. So in 2008, the Italian parliament made a law and said, okay, the Italian border is impossible to define nowadays because there's no actually correspondence between the maps and the land. So we said that the border is mobile, undefined, and we go every 2 years to measure it because the only way to being able to maintain the same level of accuracy and precision is to measure the border every 2 years. And so you see these are images from the archive of the agency, and you see it's quite evident. Basically, the old border, the one represented by the red line, was running on a glacier that then disappeared, completely melted away. And so now they had to fix the new border on the rocks because the rocks were the highest point in this case. It became the new watershed line. So these are photos of 2012 when they did the first mission, the military, not us, to measure this new border. You see, it's kind of a interesting operation. Always accompanied by this helicopter from the army. So what we decided then when we discovered this thing was that this was, at the beginning, seemed like a very marginal news, but then at the end, after reflecting upon it, became something which really explained everything we were interested into. Because somehow it was a manifestation of some of this clash between law and reality, and also representation. So how basically the tools we use to measure reality, they affect our understanding of reality, because if we didn't have like such precise instrument to measure the land, like GPS, we didn't have the need to exactly understand what the line was. And also because it's a very kind of clear example of how border still matters a lot. There's like states, like 4 states, all the one neighboring on the Alps, that spend so much resources and effort every 2 years to measure this border, even if like there's no reason, there's no physical reason of you don't see it actually, but still this means that the border is there, is present, and will be always be present. So that somehow the Schengen Agreement is something which is like a temporary political situation, not something which erased the border. So what we did, we built some devices ourselves. So now these are a few images of what we did. So what we wanted to measure, try to bring to Venice this kind of idea of a movable border. So something which is happening in real time, so the visitor could be able to actually experience this movement of the border. So we built some devices. So you see, basically at the end they look something like this. So some cases in which inside we put like a GPS, receiver and transmitter. And then this was the place for putting a solar panel, you will see after. And then we wanted to put these devices up on one of these stretches of the border. So we located one of these ice fields where the border was moving a lot over the past 10 years. And we planned an expedition there. So we took a helicopter because it was with not like enough good weather condition to walk upon on the mountain. And then this is our photographer preparing for the cold. And then we arrived on top of this ice field. And for 7 hours, 8 hours, we basically traced the border with the coordinates we had. And we put all these sensors along the line. So just to give you the feeling of the scale, this is the dimension of we work from here to the other part. And this is like the line where the border between Italy and Austria runs. And we left these 5 things on the ice. These sensors were programmed by us to transmit once every hour their position. So basically they were, through a satellite connection, they were just sending their latitude and longitude every hour. So when we left, we came home the same day, the same night, we started to receive the data. So basically what we achieved now was having like an image of this fluctuating, moving border in real time, which was represented by the coordinates of these 5 points along this line. Then we started to build a machine. It was with the scope of trying to design this line in real time. And this is basically part of the installation. These were early prototypes of these machines. We wanted to build a drawing machine which resembled the early pantograph, because pantograph was the first technology that the geographer of the national agency used to translate the images that were taken with the airplanes in the 20s of the Alps into actually accurate maps. So we wanted to use a kind of the same technology. But our machine was completely automated, so our machine was connected to a server where the data were receiving. When we were receiving this data, was able to reproduce the line of the border. Then we wanted to give the kind of physical materiality of this landscape. So we built also a model of the same ice field where we went with a helicopter. So we took all the three-dimensional 3D files, 3D models. That information is digital information publicly available. And we kind of selected the area we wanted to show, and we built a model, which was it's model in chalk. It was milled by a CNC machine, so with the same data. So the idea was to try to represent the same piece of land, the same portion of territory, with all the different possible technologies and all the different possible information by which that piece of land is officially stored in the archive of the state. At the end, it was the final design of the installation, which was composed by 3 modules. So on the one, there's the model, which we use for like projecting cartography and like an animation of this movable border. And this glass box here contains archival material, the one I showed you before. And this is the drawing machine. So the interaction, the visitor was supposed to take one of these maps from the stack, which were all the same. Basically, it was the map of the land, the same piece of land of the model, without the border, and then just putting the map on the table, the machine would start to draw a line. And the idea was that basically every visitor could have one copy of cartography, which was drawn in real time on demand with updated data from the sensors. So basically, every map was then this is like a detail of the machine. Which is okay, you don't see it very much. This is like the layout of the map. So on the front it was just cartography. You don't see it, just basically with the altitude lines. And on the back there was an explanation of the project. And then this long text you see here was the entire discussion in Parliament, where the MPs of the Parliament they approved the law of the white border, which is very hilarious because they talk about everything except of the topic. And somehow we wanted also to have that document because it was like the final piece of information of document which was upon the same subject. And this drawing, which represents the line, the border line, as a sort of archipelago of ice fields, in which we only represented the pieces of ice which were intersecting the border. And this is what the machine was doing. So basically the machine drawn a line with the position of the 5 sensors, and then timestamped the map with the date and the time. So every map was always different. There was no one map which was similar to the selection of materials. And these are images from the model. The model was a way to represent different concepts of measuring territory again. So how to basically transform spatial coordinates into geometrical relations. Also short video. The second project is a very different topic, but somehow still have to do with data and database of information. And is an example of commission work. So all these 3 projects, and we also the next one, which will about teaching, try to make an image of what we do as a practice, which is always like an intersection between research projects, so things that we start our own, based on our interest, commission work mainly for cultural institutions, and then teaching. So this is like an example of a collaboration between a design and curatorial office, which is Space Caviar, which was the curator of this exhibition made for Biennale Interior last year in Kortrijk, and a cultural institution, which is the Biennale itself. So the topic of the Biennale, of Biennale Interior 2014 was to focus on the idea of the home, and more precisely how the concept of the home has been transformed from being a universe of cultural references, of intimate relationship with others and space, and rituals, daily rituals, into basically a commodity. So something which is completely managed and ruled by financial dynamics and real estate values. For this Biennale, we did 3 different things. So we did the main output was a publication, which is this one, which was called SQM, the Quantified Home. This publication is kind of complex book in the sense that brings together different contents, mainly a series of essays about examples of homes from the present and the past that somehow it makes this idea of transformation of the home explicit. Then a series of data, so data about the commodification of the home, and then also pieces of fiction we commissioned to writers. The basic idea of the book, we printed 10,000 copies, and the pictures you see here, the idea we had, we basically traveled in 3 different warehouses in Italy, Belgium, and UK to find remnants of original wallpapers that we collected, so they were left over from original shops and stores, and we silkscreened this wallpaper with the title of the book. So all the book have the jackets made of original wallpaper. So some of them, for example, 500 copies of these or 1,000 copies of these. So they were different according to the stocks that were available of different types of wallpapers. So these were all. They were all very different, and then the book as I said. So the main part was the essays, and then was some. These were the layout for the fiction pieces. There was like a long timeline of events that was like a mix between events strictly related to real estate developments, but also like political facts or technological innovation or cultural facts, which all kind of built up with the history of transformation of the home. And then we did like architectural drawings introducing all the different projects that were explained in the book. This, for example, was a very interesting essay by Sam Jacob about these houses in West London that are kept as Victorian houses on the exterior, but then they basically built and excavate this huge case of space underneath in order to expand the property and the real estate value. Or this presentation of Super Studio. And then there was the part of the visual data, so the more quantitative representation of quantitative data, and we did several spreads representing different set of information. In this case, it was the house prices in different countries between 1975 and 2014, so how they raised basically. In this graph, which is a series of concentric circles, is the percentage of home ownership in different European countries. In this case, there is a comparison between what the percentage of men and women that do household activities in different countries, domestic activities. Or in this case, it's a comparison of how many square meters you can buy with the same amount of money, so with $50,000 in different cities of the world. So this was how the book was a kind of a challenge to keep together such many different layers of information in the book. Then what we did was 2 different exhibitions during the same week, in which the interesting part of the project was trying to use the same information that was contained in the book and translate it into like a spatial dimension. So one exhibition was this kind of theater, which was designed by Space Caviar. What we did inside was these kind of light graphs and charts. So we translated into physical space the information we used for the data visualization in the book. So we did these neon graphs in which basically the idea was to try to illuminate, have a light in the space which reflected the information of the graphs. So they were either like more white or blue, depending on what was the main value of the graphs. In this case, with the same graph we showed before. We see the blocks of some of the blocks of with the square meter quantities in different cities of the world. And the last part of the project was another exhibition, which was completely different in nature because it was done in the center of the city, while the previous one was in the how to say, like the big fair, so out of the city. Well, this one was in the center, the historical center of Kortrijk in Belgium. And this building you kind of see here was a former school, which was meant to be destroyed after demolished after the end of the Biennale. So we ran a workshop with half architecture students, half graphic design students, and we took over the building and completely transformed it. And our idea was to make the visitor experience this building for the last time. Also because, quite ironically, this building was meant to be substituted by residential and real estate development. So we completely transformed the space. So we carved hall and doors and different pathways into the space in order to make the visitors aware of the different layers of this building. And what we did was to use the building as a sort of canvas to inscribe on the walls this timeline of events that you saw quickly before in the book. So all this building became a sort of pathway for understanding this historical evolution of the concept of the home. So we did we stencil of different dates, events, and sentences, quotes for different literature books, that somehow told the story of the evolution of the home through the story of the building itself. And the experience of the exhibition was quite visitors were required to find these texts, which are all hidden within different parts of the building. And the way by which they could find them, because they were organized by date, so they had to kind of keep the chronological order. And we tried to kind of find relationships which were very random, but also quite fortunate in sometimes. For example, in the room where we ended talking about Facebook, there were these stickers of former students of the school, which kind of remind teachers from social media. And then what we did, also we used the data from the graphs also here, and we used architecture as a way of representing data. So for example, here we used the roof, which was visible from a window above, to design a graph of the growing of Airbnb as a housing service. But in this case we used the heating system, the pipes for water, to represent a graph of home ownership in different countries, so like percentages. And all these things were kind of there, so people visiting the building had to discover them around them. Or in this case, a bar chart in the rooftop of the school. Final work I'd like to show you is ongoing research I'm doing with my students in Venice, where I teach the MA in Information Design. And somehow I think this final project kind of sums up all the different things we've been watching until now. When I was asked to do this course in Information Design, I was very lucky because they gave me complete freedom on the topic and what I was. So they didn't ask me to focus on something in particular. So I really wanted to understand, to focus on this idea of the ecosystem of information. So specifically, like in very literal terms, how we represent the world, like the world itself, so the Earth as a system, as a machine. And also, I was interested in understanding how a specific editorial format, like the one of the Atlas, which flourished in the 19th century and became the first way, the first media in which, again, this idea of the world as an ecosystem, of a machine, of a technical machine, came out, now completely disappeared. Or better, geographical information is everywhere now, but we don't have any more atlases. So the only atlas that we have is Google Maps. Google Maps is not an atlas. It's just a layer of information stacked upon a geographic and mathematical grid. So there's not really any comprehensive and legible book by which we can understand and represent the Earth. So we started from a series of images. This one, which is the first image of the Earth as a whole, seen from space, which was published by NASA in 1972. And quite interesting, this image, you see the South Pole is on the top, and this is not the original image that NASA released, but this is the original image that the astronauts shot from the space. And when NASA published it, they flipped it over because they thought it was more easy for people to recognize this image because we are used to see the North on top. So that one image, which then became the most published image ever, basically is a fake photoshopped image of the planet. And then we move to this image, which is a render produced by ESA, European Space Agency, a few years ago, which represent all the junk and the satellites floating around the Earth, in orbit around the Earth. Of course, the scale is enlarged, but the quantity is precise. And it's quite interesting to see from the 70s up now to 40 years, it's impossible to read the Earth as a natural system anymore. So the Earth now is like a continuum of nature and technology. There's no solution of continuity between these two things. Then another image which is kind of resemble the same kind of spherical shape, which is the idea of the network. So this is on one side a very familiar image because we're very used to this kind of complexity and kind of very complex and network images, but a completely mysterious one because maybe some of you know what this image is, which is a representation of the internet made by CERN. But without any caption, this image is meaningless. So it's a very precise and accurate image of something which is real, but at the same time it's completely illegible for most humans. So somehow we are kind of fascinated today by this idea of complexity, by the aesthetics of complexity, where we completely lost the ability to understand what's happening. So also the technological processes that basically shape our everyday life. And I think somehow the idea of the course was how the graphic designers and the designers in general can bring back meaning to complexity, can make complexity legible without losing the meaning behind it. And the final image of this set of images is this one, which is the work of Mark Lombardi, which I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's an American. He worked for many years as a bookkeeper in a library. And then in the last years before committing suicide in 2001, he designed a series of these maps for which he became very famous. And basically these maps represent, I think 30 of them, like a number on this. And they are the result of years of research, of journalistic research he did on his own, privately, collecting information scrapped from newspapers before the internet, so it was very difficult to amass all this information and to organize it. And then he designed these maps, which are visual representation of some events in American political history, and trying to understand the hidden connection between finance, politics, and the hidden powers of America. So somehow this idea of the globe, of the ecosystem, again, in this case, becomes very legible. It's something super complex because it's maybe this diagram represents 10 years of real history, but in a way which is very, very legible and very simple. And then we focused on how the way in which we communicate the information of geographic information, so the way the image of the world changed from across the past centuries. So from the 16th century, when the maps and geography was something which was used to express power, it was a very valuable information detained by kings and rulers, and was not like available to the public. It was shown in the form of power. To the 19th century, which for the first time, with the diffusion of print and publication, atlases became a way of making this information available to everybody, or at least to the people who could afford to buy a book. 1 century after, this is the famous atlas by Albert Bayer for CCA, in which, for the first time, all these drawings that are in the introduction part of the atlas became impossible to represent the world without showing human activity. So the world is not anymore just an ensemble of biological, chemical, and physical reactions. There is a indistinguishable connection between human networks, artificial networks, technology, and ecological processes. To nowadays, in which, again, atlases became just a layer of intangible information upon a layer of mathematical representation of a sphere. So somehow our interest was to address all these issues and problems from these three points of view, so natural, technology, and politics, and especially understanding how representing reality is a very strong political act, because any drawing you do, depending on the context, but especially on the techniques, starting from the colors to the thickness of the lines, or if you choose a perspective or a taxonometry, is an inherently political act. It is something in which you try to convey a meaning to the reader, or somehow force the reader to look at the reality in a specific way. What we did the first year was a book in which we asked the student to focus on 10 topics. The book was called Atlas of Contemporary Technology. So we started from understanding how technology is shaping our world. And so we gave them 10 topics, which are basically domain of human activity. So from trading to diagnosing, farming. Some of them are really explicit. Some of them are more abstract, like vanishing. So we kind of wanted them to address different set of issues. And then the whole book is a series of double spreads in which every group of students tried to understand what those verbs, which were the starting point of the research, they meant in the real world. So the course lasted for 4 months, and like for the first couple of months they did all the research, they put together all the maps of information, and they started to draw. And these spreads are very different because we didn't impose any language. They're very simple in the color because then we printed them with risograph, which I don't know if you're familiar with, but it's a very basic technique of printing which you can just use very few colors. And they decided to organize what they found within the research process. So like to use case studies, to use like maps and diagrams and data visualization, or like illustration of specific objects that were like kind of useful for them to explaining what contemporary technology is changing into these fields of life. Also, this book was meant to work without any long text, so all the 150 pages of just these double spreads, which the students made everything, so from the editorial research, writing the text, and then organizing the drawing on a page. The culture. The biggest challenge was to make them aware of a set of topics, which were not just trying to describe what these topics were from a Wikipedia perspective, but make them really understand what was contemporary, so what was really meaningful today for understanding these environments. This, for example, was the vanishing chapters, which they studied the different techniques of camouflage in the military, or in this case, vanishing under the perspective of extinction. So this, for example, is an illustration, but also is a data visualization of all the wild species that are disappearing from the planet. Different reasons. In the second year, which is like a few months ago, we did we did the second iteration of the course, and we did the second atlas, which was called Atlas of Contemporary Networks. So we wanted to shift from a very material topic, so technology, material stuff, to more abstract, so understanding how technology is basically works together in a system. So we shifted attention to networks, and we give them another set of topics, of 10 topics, which are this one. So human networks, machine networks, flora, fauna, etc. So basically from the smaller to the outer. Oh, sorry. And then, as the last year, we asked to people, designers, critics, and writers to introduce the chapters with the text, which are talking about these topics. For example, we asked James Bridle to write a text about sky networks, or Joseph Prima to write a text about interplanetary networks, and all these 10 chapters were introduced by short essays by these people we invited to contribute. And then again, we adopted the same language to try to address describe this kind of environments. So in this case was the flora, so the idea of biodiversity. These were very nice diagrams about how different biomes changed from like Neolithic era up to now. So how they became from natural to artificial. In this case, different ways in which different species of animals organize like social relationships. In this case, a way in which a bacterium propagate from like remote areas to the urban areas. Cities and distribution of population. This case about invisible borders, so the borders which define the flight zones across the world, and how they basically are different layers of the borders which divide nations on the ground level. So this kind of different matrix of borders that we have all across the world. Space, so they're working on the International Space Station from a technological but also political point of view, so how it is managed. Some details. And in the end, again, I think this was the final, on the back cover of the book, with our 10 topics in this kind of drawing, which is a citation of what Urban did in his atlas, in which for the first time he did a similar drawing, in which for the first time appeared elements which were part of nature, so fauna, flora, and things which were part of the human activity on the planet, so like commercial routes, naval routes, air routes, these kind of things. Finished. 1 hour.
Wow. Okay, so if you want to have a seat, just a few questions. So I know we could all listen to Marco talk for I think for another couple of hours, but now you see why he gets invited all around the world to collaborate on projects. So I just have a couple of questions, and then we can open it up to the audience. But I mean, you have such an amazing take on approach to communication, and you're trained as an architect. You went to the AA in London, and I would say architects aren't really known for being great communicators. And as a rule, there are a few who are, have become very successful because they are good communicators. But I think architects have a bad rap for communication. And so I was wondering if you could talk about your own interest in making things accessible to a broader public beyond the architectural profession or design profession. And I mean, do you consider that a responsibility as a designer?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, for sure. I think the main responsibility of a designer today is to understanding that its role is to make things understandable to the public. So going back to my education, which again is I've been trained as an architect. which for me has been very important because I think architecture somehow gives you the background for being able to connect a lot of different practices and being like natively kind of transdisciplinary in a sense, because I think the architect basically when he finishes university doesn't know anything, how to basically doesn't know a profession. But somehow I think architecture by definition is not just the built environment, but especially for me, and I think in our age, I think architecture has much more to do with information. So the way in which is information, the way what I think is structuring the contemporary world, and what we should address with the same tools that in the past we've been using for addressing the built environment. But on the other side, I always feel kind of very inadequate because I teach and I kind of belong also to the what is called graphic design world, which I'm very so somehow I'm a self-taught graphic designer. So a lot of things that I do, I study by myself. So it's also a drive for being always trying to be on the edge of things. So I'm not very comfortable with the things I do. So this is a strong push for me.
Yeah. That actually relates to my next question, which is about your fearlessness when approaching these extremely complex topics. And, I think people in the humanities disciplines tend to be very siloed and become hyper specialists in their field. And there's don't have the facility to go back and forth across fields the way that you and your practice have developed. And so I was wondering if you could just talk about that. You said it doesn't bother you to be uncomfortable when confronted with new information, but you're ranging from history to science to history of science to sociology to anthropology over the course of these projects. So can you just talk about how you approach these complex?
I'm always fascinated by science in particular, and especially like scientific studies which have to do with measures and so how we make model of things. But of course I never specifically studied, so I'm really bad in physics and really bad in mathematics. So for me, when I approach these things, I try to read as much as possible, but also try to contact people that can introduce me to the topics which I don't understand. For example, while working on Italian limes, we spent 1 month and a half talking and visiting the archive in Flores in order really to understand what was for us a completely unknown territory, or something we kind of know because we know maps, but then cartography and geography is a very hard discipline, which is like a huge depth of mathematics and understanding of what is a very complex discipline. So, and what I like is that to kind of trying to unveil I think we live in an age in which science and technology, of course, are super present everywhere, are disseminated everywhere. So we kind of think of being proficient in this in scientific information and knowledge, but we are not. So I think the role of the designer again is to try to bring on the surface this complexity, which is what is behind the machines, behind the processes, behind what we do every day, but we don't see anymore.
Great. So we've got Lorena acting as our photographer and MC. So if anyone in the audience has a question, Lorena will pass you the mic. Anyone have a question for Marco? I'm sure there's some brewing.
Oh, all right. To Molly's first question, you said something along always trying to be on the edge, but also always being anxious about what you're doing. You're speaking in a school, students that are probably often anxious about what they're doing. Could you just speak a little bit more to that and how that anxiety kind of propels you, or is it one of your fuels that does propel you? This sort of, like, are you ever really satisfied with the project?
Satisfaction is a very difficult thing to achieve, I think. But more than satisfaction is being like how to say, like safe in what you're doing, which is something I never experienced. And again, for these things, because but I think all designers which do research, they have this kind of approach of trying to, they're like very superficial in everything, in singular things, but they know a lot of different domains and disciplines. And so I think this is the peculiarity of designers, that it basically has to deal with everything, with all the global information that we can have. So this is the nature of the designer itself, to be somehow unsafe in what he's doing, of not possessing the 100% of the knowledge. Whereas the scientist have this. Now the scientist, somehow his role is to go deep in something and try to obtain the maximum knowledge of this. The designer is almost the opposite role, of being able to actually look into the depth and then bring it out to the public. And of course it's an uncomfortable position, because you're not you do a lot of synthesis of what you don't understand, basically, or try to build metaphor, or to connect, to make similarities with other things in order to explain the processes you don't understand. So from an emotional point of view, it's unsettling, because you're never really safe. But on the other side is I think you have to deal with this kind of emotions and feelings.
Is there a methodology you typically use? I mean, you said you often will go out and talk to experts, or ask people. Is it a matter of kind of feeling that you've asked enough people and gotten to kind of a critical mass of information that you can move forward with it, or publish it, or present it somehow?
Yeah, for sure. I try to read as much as possible as I can on a topic, but then what I do is try to focus on a very detailed aspects of it. So if I'm studying a phenomenon, try to find an example which is the most, which I think could be the most explicit for understanding a bigger phenomenon. So try to work for case studies, basically. Try to understand how things manifested into a specific context, and then trying to basically build up a general law out from it. So
We had another question. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. It was really interesting to see. I don't know, I hadn't seen some of the newer stuff, but I'm struck by how your work isn't overly didactic, but also at the same time not overly theoretical. And I think in that way, you're working kind of in a very architectural way, working mainly conceptually, which is interesting. And so I kind of wonder what you hope for the agency of your work. Like, do you, on one hand, would you like be ecstatic if it was picked up by like a huge magazine and had a kind of huge mass broad appeal that changed people's ideas of, understanding something? Or do you not care about that and you're totally fine if it's beautiful and poetic and nobody ever sees it?
It's not something I actually think in these terms, in the sense that I tend not to be poetic in the general meaning of these terms, in the sense that I don't like things which are kind of even. I think even at the end, if for example, the Italian Limes project, if you look at the installations in something which is really complete and sleek and nice, I think it presents a set of information which is difficult to understand at the end. So of course you can look at it and you look some beautiful images, you see the machine moving and you grasp something, but then our aim was to give the possibility of going more deep somehow. So I think it's really important to always give different level of access. So make what you're doing understandable to what of just 1 minute, and so just look at it in a very quick way, but also trying to give the way of understanding like a broader set of things. So of course, when you get published and your work circulate, is always like a pleasure, mostly because then you get in touch with other people, so you have the chance to exchange interest and you can create discussion with other people. But also, I think it's very important to structure your communication in different levels, so to make your work understandable, not within just a circle of people. I'm not interested in that, but try to make it open to as much interference as possible.
I just wanted to pick up on the word agency for a second, because it has meanings in philosophy and sociology, but you call your office an agency, which has at least in the U.S., a pretty specific meaning, and as a business that provides a service, and often like an ad agency. Yeah. So, I was just curious, was that an intentional kind of naming?
Yeah, it was intentional in the sense exactly this one, because at the end we provide services, like for both for like companies or institutions, but also because I like that in the word agency there is like the meaning of doing things, so transforming things, and not just of studying or reading things. But also because I get a bit bored with the word studio, so agencies was more fitting for me.
Gotcha. I think there was another question over here.
Yeah. So you brought up this idea of synsemia, which I understand is a sort of architecture of elements of communication, how they are arranged within space or within time. And I really absolutely I love your SQM project, which was in a way an architecture of information. I wanted to talk to you about, if you could talk about sort of how you choose your modes of representation. I think very often we hear designers say, and then we came up with, and then there's so much that's like elided in that phrase. So with either SQM or the atlases, if you could just talk a little bit more about the decision of the use of particular modes of representation, whether it's architectural elements, or the page, diagrams, images, numbers, text. How do you create that?
I think what we try most is to create a set of rules for each project, which kind of are very free to interpret, and then to work closely with the curators or other people with whom we work with. So, for example, I think the work on the atlases is quite clear in this sense, because we let the students very free in choosing if drawing more diagrams or more illustration or more maps, because of course we want also to respect and to kind of use their abilities and their skills. But then we set a set of rules. So we said, okay, 2 colors, all vector drawings, all this kind of different, only these techniques of representation, in order to have like a homogeneous output in the end. I have to say that just by setting rules and guidelines, the book, even if done by 30 different students to 30 different persons working on their own, it is like quite amazingly uniform, and seems like the work of a collective hand, basically. And but also with the professional work we do, so the commission project, we try to be very open until the end. So not to say, okay, no, this is our design and we want it to be like this. So to be always open to influences by the curators or other people, and to inform the project with this kind of dynamic process. So I have to say that I try to stick to the content every time. So I think I'm not identified with a particular style or language or particular graphic design style, but just trying to understand what suits best the content we need to communicate.
Any more questions? So, last question before we break for drinks. Can we buy copies of your atlases? Are those available?
Hopefully next year. So what we did was we printed only 50 copies because they were all funded by the students. So we found this small but really nice publishing house in Venice, and they have like a reserve printer. So we printed like a limited edition of 50 copies. 30 were for the students, and then 10 for the people, the contributors of the essays, and then 10 we gave to people they somehow contributed to the course. Now we want to do the third one next year, and then hopefully we'll be able to put them online and make a system from basically publishing on demand, so everybody could be able to basically have their own copy. For the moment, there are no hard copies available anymore.
Well, we'll all look forward to the day, I'm sure. So I hope everybody will join us next door for some drinks and to continue the conversation with Marco. But first, if you could join me in thanking him one more time for a fantastic lecture.